I remember the pressure in my surgeon's voice more clearly than I remember the pain. "Britney, we can't delay this much longer." "I know," I whispered, clutching my phone. "I just need someone to pick up my twins." The nurse adjusted the blanket over my legs while another doctor studied my latest scan. The emergency department buzzed around me with controlled urgency, but my world had narrowed to one terrifying fact. Emma and Ethan would be standing outside their daycare in less than an hour, waiting for a mother who wasn't coming. My fingers trembled as I called the only people I thought I could trust. "Dad, please, I need you." Richard answered with music blasting in the background. "Make it quick, Britney. We're almost ready to leave." "I've been admitted to the hospital. They have to operate tonight. Please, I need you to pick up the twins." There was a pause. Then my mother took the phone. "Oh, honestly," Elaine sighed. "Every time we finally have plans, you create another emergency." The words hit harder than the pain shooting through my abdomen. "I'm not creating anything," I said, struggling to stay calm. "The doctors say I need surgery. I don't have anyone else." "You always make everything about you," she replied coldly. "You're becoming nothing but a nuisance and a burden." I stared at the ceiling, unable to believe what I had just heard. Not because they were refusing to help. Because they were saying it while choosing a concert over their own grandchildren. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Dad, Mom, these are your grandchildren." Richard's voice returned. "Vanessa bought these Elton John tickets months ago. We're not throwing away that kind of money." I closed my eyes. The morphine dulled the pain in my stomach, but nothing dulled the ache spreading through my chest. "I'm asking for one night." "You always ask for something," Elaine snapped. I forced myself to breathe. "For the last 2 years, I've paid your electric bill." Silence. "I paid for Mom's dental implants." More silence. "I helped with your mortgage when Dad retired." I thought maybe, just maybe, that reminding them of everything I'd done would awaken something inside them. Instead, I heard laughter. Not theirs. Vanessa's. She didn't even bother lowering her voice. If Britney can't handle twins, maybe she shouldn't have had them. Then she laughed again. Richard chuckled quietly. Elaine sighed in annoyance. "Figure it out yourself for once." The line went dead. For several seconds, I simply stared at my phone. The room suddenly felt much quieter. A nurse approached carefully. "Is everything okay?" I looked up and managed the smallest shake of my head. "No." She gently squeezed my shoulder before stepping away to give me privacy. I wasn't crying because my parents had refused. I was crying because, for the first time, they hadn't even pretended to care. The anesthesiologist entered, carrying a clipboard. "Mrs. Carter will be taking you upstairs shortly." Widowed. 33 years old. 2 4-year-olds depending entirely on me. And the people I'd spent years supporting had just decided a concert mattered more. I unlocked my phone again. My contact list scrolled past relatives, past neighbors, past coworkers, until I stopped on a number I'd saved nearly a year earlier but never imagined using. A 24-hour emergency, nanny service. I pressed call. Within minutes, a coordinator answered. "I have 2 children," I said, fighting back tears. "I'm being taken into emergency surgery. Can anyone pick them up from daycare today?" She didn't hesitate. "Give me their names and the school's information. We'll handle the rest." No guilt. No complaints. No lecture. Just help. By the time the nurse wheeled my bed toward the operating room, I had received confirmation that an experienced caregiver was already on her way to Emma and Ethan. I placed my phone on my chest. Then I made one final decision before anesthesia took over. If strangers could show my children more compassion than their own grandparents, what if I never asked my parents for anything again? When I opened my eyes, The first thing I noticed was the dull ache running across my abdomen. The second was the steady beeping of the heart monitor beside me. For one terrifying second, I forgot everything. Then I remembered. The surgery. Emma. Ethan. My parents. My hand immediately reached for my phone on the bedside table. The screen lit up with a notification. Not from my mother. Not from my father. From the emergency nanny. Good morning, Britney. Emma and Ethan slept well. They're eating pancakes now. Attached were 2 pictures. Emma was grinning with syrup on her cheek. Ethan was proudly holding up a stuffed dinosaur while wearing mismatched pajamas. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. They're okay, I whispered. A nurse smiled as she adjusted my IV. Your surgery went very well. Thank you. I wasn't thanking her only for the operation. I was thanking everyone who had shown me more kindness in 24 hours than my own parents had managed in years. The nanny sent another message. They asked when Mommy would feel better. I told them you're the bravest mom I know. My vision blurred. I turned my face toward the window before the nurse could notice the tears. The next 2 days passed slowly. Walking hurt. Laughing hurt. Even sitting upright hurt. But every few hours, my phone buzzed with updates. Emma coloring pictures. Ethan helping make sandwiches. The twins playing board games with the nanny. Every picture eased one fear while creating another. Someone I had hired only hours earlier treated my children with warmth and patience. Meanwhile, neither of my parents called. Not once. No text asking if the surgery had gone well. No question about whether the twins were frightened. Nothing. On the second evening, I absent-mindedly opened social media while waiting for another round of medication. The first photo that appeared made my stomach tighten. Vanessa stood in front of a brightly lit stage, smiling with both of my parents. My father had one arm around her shoulders. My mother was laughing. The caption read, "Perfect family night, making unforgettable memories." I stared at those words for several seconds. Perfect family. I wasn't in the picture. Neither were Emma or Ethan. Apparently, we no longer counted. I quietly locked my phone. The following morning, my hospital room became unexpectedly busy. My coworker Melissa arrived carrying fresh flowers. You scared all of us, she said, pulling up a chair. I didn't mean to. She smiled gently. Nobody plans emergency surgery. Before she left, she handed me an envelope. Everyone at the clinic pitched in. Inside was a collection for groceries, children's meals, and anything else I might need during recovery. An hour later, my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, stopped by. I've already arranged dinner for your first week home, she announced matter-of-factly. You didn't have to do that. I know. She smiled. That's why I wanted to. By afternoon, another neighbor volunteered to drive Emma and Ethan to preschool until I recovered. Then another coworker offered to help with laundry. No one acted inconvenienced. No one sighed. No one called me a burden. The contrast became impossible to ignore. People who owed me absolutely nothing were showing up without being asked. The people who had raised me couldn't spare one evening. 3 days after surgery, I was finally discharged. The nanny helped settle the twins back into our home before quietly preparing to leave. Emma wrapped both arms around her waist. Will you come back? The nanny smiled. If your mommy ever needs help again, I'll be here. After she left, I tucked the twins into bed early. They were exhausted. So was I. The house finally fell silent. I carried my laptop to the dining table. For years, I'd avoided looking too closely at my finances. Not because I couldn't afford to help my parents. Because seeing the numbers made me uncomfortable. Tonight, I forced myself to look. Automatic payments. Every month. Mortgage assistance. Electricity. Water. Prescription reimbursements. Car insurance. Even the deposit for the vacation my parents had planned with Vanessa. I leaned back in my chair. I had never totaled it before. The amount made my chest tighten. Thousands upon thousands of dollars. Money that could have gone toward Emma and Ethan's future. Money I had convinced myself was buying family. Instead, it had only bought expectation. I whispered the question aloud. Were they ever grateful? Or was I just convenient? No one answered. The only sound came from the gentle hum of my refrigerator. I opened my banking app. Each recurring transfer appeared neatly listed on the screen. My finger hovered over the first one. I hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Then I pressed cancel. The confirmation box appeared. I selected yes. Then I canceled the next payment. And the next. And the next. By the time I closed my laptop, every dollar I had been sending my parents every month was gone. For the first time in years, my money would stay with my children. 3 days after I canceled the payments, my phone began vibrating before 7 in the morning. Dad. Mom. Dad again. By the time I finished helping Emma and Ethan get dressed, I had 17 missed calls and 6 messages. Dad's first text said, "Call me immediately." The second was less controlled. "What did you do to our account?" Mom followed with, "The mortgage payment was rejected. Fix this before your father finds out." I almost laughed at that one. He had already called 9 times. I placed the phone face down and continued brushing Emma's hair. "Grandma coming today?" she asked. My hand paused. "No, sweetheart." "Why?" I looked at her reflection in the mirror. "Because Mommy is making some changes." Before she could ask what that meant, someone began pounding on the front door. Not knocking. Pounding. Ethan jumped. "Mommy, who's that?" I already knew. "Stay in the living room with your sister." I walked carefully toward the door, one hand pressed against the healing incision beneath my shirt. When I opened it, my father stood on the porch, red-faced and breathing hard. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't ask why I was moving slowly. He held up his phone. Our mortgage payment bounced. "Good morning to you too. Don't play games with me, Britney." Mrs. Henderson, who was watering flowers next door, glanced over. Dad lowered his voice, but not enough. "You need to put the money back today." I leaned against the doorframe. "No." His expression changed, as though I had spoken in another language. "What did you say?" I said no. He stepped closer. "You don't get to suddenly abandon your responsibilities because you're upset." I stared at him. "My responsibilities? Your mother and I planned our expenses around your support. And I planned my surgery around having parents who would help their grandchildren." His jaw tightened. "That was different." "How?" "You survived, didn't you?" The words carried across the front yard. Mrs. Henderson stopped watering. A man walking his dog slowed down. Dad noticed them and shifted his weight. "Keep your voice down." "I am speaking normally." "You're embarrassing this family." I looked directly at him. "Which mattered more, Dad, your grandchildren or the concert?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. A car pulled up at the curb. Vanessa climbed out before it had fully stopped. She marched toward us wearing sunglasses and carrying an expensive handbag I recognized from her concert photos. "Are you serious?" she demanded. "Mom is panicking because of you." Mom wasn't panicking when I was being taken into surgery. You always make yourself the victim. Mrs. Henderson stepped closer to the edge of her yard. Was Britney really in emergency surgery when all of you went to that concert. Vanessa turned sharply. This is a private family matter. Dad pointed at me. See what you've done. Now the whole neighborhood thinks we're monsters. I haven't called anyone a monster, I said. I've only explained what happened. Another neighbor approached while collecting his mail. What happened? Vanessa threw up her hands. Oh, wonderful. I kept my voice steady. I needed emergency surgery. Daycare was closing. I asked my parents to watch the twins overnight. They refused because they had concert tickets. The neighbor frowned. And she was paying their mortgage, Mrs. Henderson added. Dad snapped. That is nobody's business. Vanessa looked at me with open fury. You had no right to tell people about the money. You had no problem spending it. Her face flushed. Dad stepped closer again. You will restart those payments today. No. Britney. I am not paying another bill for people who called me a burden while I was lying in a hospital bed. The front door opened behind me. Emma stood there clutching her stuffed rabbit. Mommy. Dad immediately softened his expression. There's my little girl. Emma didn't move toward him. She looked at me instead. Why is Grandpa shouting? The question silenced everyone. I turned and guided her back inside. Go sit with Ethan. I'll be there in a minute. When I faced my family again, Dad's authority had cracked. The neighbors were no longer pretending not to listen. Vanessa folded her arms. So this is revenge? No, this is a boundary. Dad scoffed. You'll calm down. I already am calm. You always come back. That sentence told me everything. He truly believed I would surrender because I always had before. I stepped inside and placed my hand on the door. You should start making other financial arrangements. Dad stared at me. Then he turned toward the neighbors. Mind your own business. He stormed back to his car. Vanessa followed, but not before pointing at me. When they lose the house, everyone will know it was your fault. I closed the door without answering. That evening, relatives began calling. Some had seen Vanessa's angry post claiming I had suddenly abandoned our parents. Others had heard about the confrontation from neighbors. My Aunt Linda called just after the twins went asleep. I heard what happened, she said carefully. Which version? The one where your parents left you during emergency surgery and now want everyone to focus on the mortgage. I sat down at the kitchen table. For the first time all day, my shoulders relaxed. I keep wondering how they could do it. Aunt Linda went quiet. Then she exhaled slowly. Britney, there's something you've never been told about how your parents talk about you. The next morning, I asked Mrs. Henderson if she could watch Emma and Ethan for an hour. Take all the time you need, she said warmly. Those two are already making themselves at home. Emma hugged my leg. Are you coming back? I'll be back before lunch, sweetheart. She nodded, satisfied, then raced inside after Ethan. I drove to a quiet coffee shop across town, where Aunt Linda was already waiting with 2 cups of tea. She looked more nervous than I expected. I almost canceled, she admitted as I sat down. Why? Because I should have told you this years ago. I folded my hands on the table. I'm listening. For several moments, she simply stared into her cup. Finally, she spoke. Your parents have always talked about Vanessa differently than they talked about you. I wasn't surprised. I know she's the favorite. Linda slowly shook her head. It's worse than favoritism. She lowered her voice. Whenever the family gathered without you, your father used to joke that he never worried about retirement because he had Britney. I frowned. What does that mean? He'd laugh and say, Vanessa spends money, Britney earns it. I felt my stomach tighten. He really said that? Linda nodded. More than once. She looked genuinely ashamed. Your mother would smile and tell everyone not to worry because you were too loyal to ever walk away. I stared silently across the cafe. Linda continued. They called you dependable. She paused. Predictable. Another pause. Your father's retirement plan. The words landed like bricks. Never once. My daughter. Just. An income. Linda reached across the table. I wanted to believe they were joking. Were they? She slowly withdrew her hand. Not anymore. Neither of us spoke for a while. Everything suddenly fit together. The constant requests. The guilt. The way every favor had become an expectation. The emergency surgery hadn't changed my parents. It had simply exposed who they had been all along. When I returned home, life continued moving forward. I attended follow-up appointments. The twins returned to preschool. My incision slowly healed. Meanwhile, my phone never stopped buzzing. Voicemails. Texts. Emails. At first, they sounded demanding. Then frustrated. Soon afterward, desperate. Dad left one voicemail. The bank keeps calling. Another arrived that evening. We just need temporary help. Mom texted repeatedly. Our insurance payment didn't clear. The cable was disconnected. The credit card company froze the account. Our vacation had to be canceled. Not one message asked whether I was still in pain. Not one asked whether Emma and Ethan were coping after seeing their mother rushed into surgery. Not one asked how recovery was going. Every conversation led back to money. I stopped listening to the voicemails. I archived the texts without replying. A week later, I received another call. This time it was my cousin Rachel. I ran into your parents yesterday. How are they? She hesitated. They're different. What do you mean? Your dad was trying to negotiate payment plans with 3 different companies, while your mom kept saying this was all just a misunderstanding. Rachel sighed. They honestly seem convinced you'll change your mind. I almost smiled. They've believed that my whole life. Rachel was quiet for a moment. They're wrong this time, aren't they? Yes. For the first time, the answer came without hesitation. Exactly 2 weeks after my surgery, I was helping Ethan build a block tower in the living room while Emma colored beside us. The morning sunlight poured through the front windows. For the first time in days, the house felt peaceful. Then came a knock. 3 slow knocks. Not loud. Not angry. Almost hesitant. Emma looked up. Mommy. I heard it. I walked to the front door. Through the glass, I immediately recognized them. My father stood with his shoulders slumped. His expensive watch was gone. My mother's eyes were swollen from crying. Neither of them looked anything like the confident people who had laughed before leaving for that concert. I opened the door only a few inches. No one spoke at first. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. We need to talk. Behind me, Emma and Ethan watched quietly from the hallway. I looked from my parents to my children and realized the decision I made next would shape every relationship we had going forward. I glanced back toward the hallway where Emma and Ethan were standing. They weren't frightened, just curious. I smiled gently. Why don't you two finish your coloring in the playroom? Mrs. Henderson will be here in a minute. Emma studied my face for a second before nodding. Okay, Mommy. Once they disappeared down the hall, I opened the door a little wider. You can come in. Neither of my parents spoke as they stepped into the living room. The silence was almost surreal. Usually, Dad filled every room with his opinions before anyone else had a chance to speak. Now he looked around awkwardly, avoiding my eyes. Mom clutched her purse with both hands as though she needed something to hold herself together. I remained standing. I wasn't interested in pretending this was an ordinary family visit. Dad cleared his throat. We've had a difficult couple of weeks. I waited. The mortgage is behind. Still, I said nothing. Our credit cards are maxed out. He swallowed. We've had to cancel everything. Mom finally spoke. We're trying to work things out. I looked from one to the other. Then I asked quietly, "How's my recovery?" They both blinked. "I'm sorry," Dad asked. "My recovery," I repeated. "How do you think it's been?" Neither answered. Did either of you wonder whether my surgery was successful? Silence. Did either of you ask whether Emma and Ethan were scared while I was in the operating room? Mom's eyes filled with tears. We assumed everything went well. You assumed. I nodded slowly. And that's exactly the problem. Dad shifted uncomfortably. We didn't come here to argue. No. You came because your bills are due. Neither of them denied it. I continued calmly. The very first thing you mentioned after walking into my home wasn't my health. I counted on my fingers. It wasn't Emma. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't even an apology. I looked directly at my father. It was money. His shoulders slumped. I made a terrible mistake. I held his gaze. If the concert were tomorrow instead of 2 weeks ago, and I called you from that hospital bed again. He looked down at the floor. Would you choose differently? The room became perfectly still. Mom quietly whispered, "Richard." He opened his mouth, closed it again. That hesitation lasted only a few seconds. It was all the answer I needed. I nodded. Thank you. Dad looked up confused. For what? For finally being honest. Mom began crying. We never wanted this. I spoke gently, but without wavering. This didn't happen because of one concert. Dad frowned. It didn't. No. I took a slow breath. This happened because that night finally showed me something I'd refused to see. I looked at both of them. For years, I believed helping you meant we were close. I thought paying your mortgage was supporting family. I thought covering your medical bills was what daughters did. I thought saying yes every single time proved my love. I shook my head. But none of it made us closer. It only convinced you I'd never stop. Dad rubbed his forehead. Britney. Aunt Linda told me how you talked about me. His eyes widened. She hadn't warned him. You called me dependable. He remained silent. You called me predictable. Still nothing. And you joked that I was your retirement plan. Mom covered her mouth. Dad didn't deny it. He couldn't. I smiled sadly. The emergency surgery wasn't the moment you lost me. You lost me long before that. I just didn't know it yet. Dad finally looked at me. What do we do now? It was the first genuine question he had asked since arriving. I answered honestly. You rebuild your lives. He stared. Without my money. Mom wiped her eyes. And the children. I looked toward the hallway, where Emma's laughter drifted softly through the house. They deserve people who show up when life is difficult. I turned back toward them. If you ever want to be part of their lives again, it won't happen because we're related. It will happen only after you've shown, over time, that you've changed. No guilt. No pressure. No expectations. And certainly, no financial dependence. Dad slowly nodded. For the first time in my life. He had no argument. Mom reached into her purse. She placed a small silver key on the coffee table. I think this belongs to you. It was the spare key. I'd given them years earlier for emergencies. Neither of us reached for it. It simply rested there between us, like the final chapter of a very long story. Dad stood first. I'm sorry. This time, the words sounded sincere. But sincerity couldn't erase years of choices. I walked them to the front door. Neither of us hugged. Neither of us promised to call. They stepped outside together. Dad looked older than he had just 2 weeks earlier. Mom glanced back once before getting into the car. Then they drove away. I closed the door quietly. Not angrily. Not triumphantly. Just peacefully. Over the following months, life slowly settled into something healthier. The money I had once sent to my parents every month stayed in my own account. I met with a financial planner and opened college savings plans for Emma and Ethan. I created an emergency fund large enough that I would never again panic over unexpected medical bills. Mrs. Henderson became like an honorary grandmother to the twins. The emergency nanny remained part of our lives as well, helping occasionally and joining us for birthdays. My coworkers continued checking in long after my recovery ended. Little by little, I stopped measuring family by blood. Instead, I measured it by who actually showed up. Emma and Ethan grew surrounded by people who kept their promises. People who never made them feel like inconveniences. One afternoon, months later, Emma climbed onto my lap while we watched the rain through the living room window. "Mommy." "Yes." "If I ever need help." I wrapped my arms around her. "I'll be there." "What if it's really, really important?" I kissed the top of her head. "Especially then." She smiled and rested her head against my shoulder. At that moment, I realized something my parents never understood. Love isn't proven by the money you give. It's proven by the moments you refuse to walk away. The night my parents chose a concert over me was the night I finally stopped carrying people who had never been willing to carry me.